prevention. Got it. Sorry, I just got distracted for a
Yeah,
moment.
my apologies.
It's all good. It's all good. And so I am because of the overdose, unfortunately, of opioid crisis, Milford and Rehoboth were identified, and so I am responsible for the Rehoboth area.
Got it.
And I'm working towards just collaborating with the community and finding what their readiness is. And so it's just continuous until, until further due notice. I'm a part of the community and helping them speak their truth.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here and sharing that about
Problem.
I don't know if I even recognize that. I have family there in Rehoboth. It's a beautiful community. So thank you very, very much. Lauren, could you share with us who you represent and kind of the role that you play?
Sure. I'm gonna keep my audio off because our internet is not, or my camera off because our internet's not the best.
Not a problem.
I'm with the Boys and Girls Club, and my office is in Frame, so right in the Wilmington area. And I'm working with their Maverick grant. So it's a lot of teen and youth prevention.
Got it. Got it. Thank you so very, very much. And I see Linda is still having some issues with her audio. I'm hoping that she's able to hear us. And Linda, if you want, you can just go ahead and connect with us via chat for the time being. But I'm glad that you're here. Lisa, would you mind sharing kind of the organization that you're working with and how you might be able to do so? Okay, good. With Courageous Hearts. Yes, that's right. That's right. And a prevention specialist doing outreach in the community. Fantastic. And Lindsay, just for the sake of the recording.
Okay, so I'm Lindsay with University of Delaware in the 4-H program. So I go out in the community, after school programs and community-based programs to teach BOTF and life skills.
Perfect, perfect. Well, I can't think of a more perfect crew to be able to have and engage in this kind of conversation. I'm looking forward to what we're going to learn with and from each other. The fact that it's a smaller group will allow us to be able to be much more intimate with respect to this. And so please bring everything that you have to the conversation so that you might be able to get out of it what it is that you're looking for throughout the day. And so with that, you couldn't be in better hands than my dear friend, Leslie Dill, who had put together a wonderful, wonderful presentation and training for us today. And with that, Leslie, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pass the mic to you.
That sounds great. And I do love these smaller groups. And like Carlton said, and I'll just say this about myself, I don't stand on ceremony. I would much rather that y'all ask the questions that you have that are specific to the work that you do. I've definitely done community outreach. I'm working on a grant right now. I've worked at the university. I've worked for health departments, nonprofits. So like, if you're like, I have this question or this is my concern or how can I, like some real world, like we can do a case study, a little impromptu case study if that's going to be most beneficial. And I feel like also that when we're working with these populations, if you've experienced something, it's probably something that's going to benefit someone else to hear and talk about in their work. Maybe we can also cumulatively troubleshoot whatever that is. Carlton, I forgot to mention this earlier, but I did wear green for your Eagles today.
I love it. I love it.
So I'm more of a college football girl, but I do always watch the Super Bowl because that's just what you do. But I was the only one in my house rooting for the Eagles, and I'm sad that they did not bring home the win, if you will.
Thank you for your condolences.
Yes. Okay. And just really quickly, just to round everybody out, because it looks like Thomas just joined us. Thomas, if you wouldn't mind, because everyone else sort of introduced themselves, and just for a quick recap, we have some people doing some grant work, doing some community outreach and education around prevention and opioids and things like that. That's a very brief recap, but if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and just tell us where you're at and what you do, who you serve.
All right, my name's Tom Morrison. I'm from the Department of Children, Youth and Family Services, and I manage the SABG grant, just working with a ton of providers. Just got off the road, getting back to the office, but it's a pleasure to be here and see you all once again.
Super. I appreciate that very much. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and share screen and get us started off because I have a full docket for us today. And most everyone was here for a previous session. At least one. A lot of you are here for both. So that's really great. And so I won't need to introduce myself, except to say that this week, if you happen to be in Charlotte, North Carolina, it's Charlotte Roller Derby's home opener. And I skated before the pandemic for 3 years. I was a derby chick, but then we had the pandemic and I haven't put my skates back on in the past 2 years, but I will be at the derby home opener. So if you're in Charlotte, I'll
I
be
have
there.
I haven't thought about roller derby since I was a kid. Oh my gosh. That's
I
crazy.
Yeah, I do. And also, I don't, this is not like a conflict of interest, but I did check off a bucket list for myself, which was to do a TED Talk. So I was a TEDx speaker at UNC Charlotte when they had their very first TEDx event. And if you Google, or not Google, go on YouTube and put in TED Talk Leslie Dill or TEDx Leslie Dill, it'll come up. But the topic was porn culture and how porn culture has the capacity to impact our sexual health and the sexual health of our youth. So if you got 15 minutes to kill, actually 14 minutes and change, check it out. It's pretty good. It's less than 5 years old, but I'll never do that again. I've spoken, y'all, in front of hundreds and hundreds of people on a stage when it's just me. I've never been so nervous as I was to put that mic on and get up on stage. I don't know why it was so different for that, but if you're looking for something to kill 15 minutes, go check me out. So every time we do our land recognition, recognizing that we are working, living, and playing on native lands. Today, I'm coming to you from Sugary and Catawba land in Charlotte, North Carolina. So we like to do our native land recognition. And in my email signature, and actually, I don't know, oh, it says it right down there. You can actually look that up, usdac.us/native land, and you can see which native land you live, work, and play on as well. You know, I like to recognize an obscure holiday. Today is National Gumdrops Day. I unfortunately am living my best. I hate that. Well, fat is the word that I use for myself. I'm in my diet zone right now, so I won't be having any gumdrops. But if you want to have gumdrops, it's also World Hippo Day. Maybe I should have picked that one. So if you're into hippopotamuses, I don't know. Anyways, check them out. Yeah. Hippopotamus. There we go. So this was a 3-part series. Part 1, and so each of these were intended to build on each other. So if you've been here since the beginning, that's wonderful, because we had that very first conversation about cultural humility, talking about exploring that concept, and then talking about ways that the language that we do can actually engage the people that we seek to serve. And so just being real intentional about our language. And we're going to do a full, a mini review in just a second. The last one that we had, and thank you all for being here, because I felt like there were still a ton of questions. What I've realized is that with each one of these, I never actually get through all the content. So if there's any part that you wanted more of, do check out the slides that were shared in PDF format after the presentation. But unfortunately, there's just never enough hours in the day, especially if you have people who are genuinely interested and engaged and want to be here for the conversation, which y'all do because you're serving these people. So we had a conversation about the LGBTQ and T. And again, I intentionally put the T out at the end where you don't normally see it, because it seems like most people have more questions around gender than they do sexual orientation. It's sometimes a harder concept to grasp. So that was very intentional. Today, we are going to talk about the disproportionate effects of substance use disorder on LGBTQ youth. So all of the conversations that we've had up until this point have led us to this place where we're now ready to talk about the who, where, what, when, why. And the part of the what is like, okay, then what? Like, what are we doing about it? What can we do that's special and maybe innovative and new to support this community when they need the extra support that we know they need. And just, I mean, historically speaking, marginalized communities are disproportionately affected by XYZ bad thing. And when you add in asterisks, that's what I said, asterisk. So an asterisk out beside anybody's names means any of those marginalized communities. So, you know, if my name's Leslie and I identify as lesbian, I'm Native American, I'm fat, you know, all of these things add different, you know, add another thing, another asterisk to my name, and therefore I'm more disproportionately affected by some of these negative health outcomes. And so starting out as an LGBTQ youth, you already have one of those asterisks. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more today. And full disclosure, I've been overweight my whole life. And so fat is just the word that I use for and about myself and about my existence. And that's my lived experience and the word I choose to use. And if you were here for the first conversation about language, you know, if you're a part of a certain demographic or a certain community and that demographic chooses to use a certain word that has historically been termed, you know, derogatory or mean or ugly, when they reclaim that word, that is powerful for them. I reclaim the word fat because nobody can call me fat and hurt me because I use fat. I am fat. It's what, if that's the worst thing you can say about me, okay. So that's how I feel about it. And that's why I use that word. So I hope nobody's too upset about that. Okay, so the brief review, again, we use the term cultural humility over cultural competence because the word competence has a very right or wrong feeling to it. Like you're either going to do it right or you're going to do it wrong. And so we want to say humility because we all come into the space saying, hey, check it out. I don't know all the things. I'm here to learn and I'm here to do better tomorrow than I did today. And that's all that we can ask for anyone. So that humility is what we want to bring to the space. Privilege, that again, you know, the things that you can have the most privilege with are often things that we don't think about. Privilege is really, you know, when you walk down the street, what do people see when they look at you? If they look at you and they're like, yeah, he definitely looks very masculine, straight, white, he's a he, all of those things are points of privilege. So and it's different for, you know, people who walk down the street and represent themselves in other ways as to how, you know, what level of privilege that they would have. Because I look like I'm a white woman, I have some privilege, you know, more privilege than a black or brown woman. Language does matter, and it also is ever changing. And so using the term that you think is most appropriate at one time may not be the most appropriate next week. And so that's why intent matters, and expressing your intention to use words that are validating and affirming to someone's existence, even if that might not be the word that they want, it gives them that permission to say like, hey, I recognize that, you know, you think this is a great word, but this is the word that I really want to use for myself, and then respecting that. And not being afraid to talk about it. And I say talk about it goes for all of these parts, like being okay with being uncomfortable, because growth is uncomfortable sometimes, and sometimes painful, and sometimes all of the things. I was just talking to my partner about it today because he's engaging in a class and he's like, I'm so scared. Like, what if I don't do well? And I'm like, honey, you'll do the best that you can do. And if you're uncomfortable, that means that you're learning. That's all it is. So, you know, just having those conversations and recognizing that this work is hard, and there's no like straight line of this is how it's going to be. It's all over the place. And so you'll remember me talking about the binary. And so from being very small children, we're taught that it's like left or right, black or white, this or that. And then we get into this stage of our lives and they're like, no, it's not those things. It's all over the place. And so it's more about finding this comfort within yourself to be okay with not having the answers all the time, and knowing that just because you know something to be true one day might be not true the next day. And that could be even talking about an individual. Queer, like I said, we went over that last time. Queer is just a word that has been reclaimed by the community. We do not use the word homosexual anymore because it's very scientific. It was used during studies and things like that. The community as a whole is not a big fan of that word, and intention matters. Again, could you use the word queer and it be in a derogatory way? Absolutely. But intention matters. Just to remember that Delaware is a medium on the LGBTQ map, and that's when you're looking at like the friendliest states, how they rank. And so medium was actually pretty good. There's only a few states that actually rank in the high. And then, do any of you remember the pants analogy that you would want to? Could anyone, and I'll send you a prize, I'm telling you what, out of my own stash. Can anybody explain the difference using the pants analogy for gender identity, gender expression, sexual identity, and sex? Or do you think you can? Or do you want to try?
Anybody raise their hand if they think they're willing to give it a shot? There you go. Go ahead, Holly. Unmute yourself.
All right, I'm gonna give it a try.
Okay, do it.
So what I recall is the way in which you wear your pants. And that not necessarily defines you, but it could be defining. And so it's really just how you feel in your own pants.
Which one is that? Which one is the way that you feel about the pants that you're wearing?
So that is, I think it's the slackier style.
No. I'm sorry. Okay, so
Sorry.
when we think about how we
You were
feel,
close. You were close. You were getting there, but
there were three pictures I remember.
there were
Tight, one was slacky, and one was kind of like just in the middle in the casual style.
Okay, forget the picture. I have direct questions for you.
Okay.
Okay.
Putting me on the spot. Okay.
It's okay. It's okay. We're all here to learn together. So
Okay.
when you think about how a person would feel about the pants that they're supposed to wear as an individual, would that be gender identity or gender expression?
I would say, you mean the way that they feel in their own pants, or the way?
Yes, so how about the way they wear their pants? Which one is the way that they? Correct. Okay, so the way that they wear their pants is their gender expression. The way that they feel about the pants that they're supposed to wear, that society says that they're supposed to wear, is which one?
The identity.
Yes, gender identity. And then you have your sexual identity, which refers to whose pants do you want to get into?
Yes.
And then you have your sex, which is what's actually in your pants.
In your pants. Yes.
Holly, okay, you are magic. I want you to drop your email address in the chat.
Okay.
And I will be in touch, and I'm going to send you a swag box from me.
You're sweet.
Okay.
I do have questions though. So there's got to be an open Q&A because there's some things going on that I'm very confused about.
Okay. Well, why don't you just ask them now?
Okay. So I have a girlfriend who has kids who I'm actually going to the Boys and Girls Club in Rehoboth today. I'm not going to bring it up, but I'm just, because it's one of the kids that's going to be in 3rd grade, I'm going to see her again. There's been this identifying thing going on, which I'm very confused by. You're either identifying as an animal, like a horse, or as she told me, her children are telling her that some kids in class identify as a window. Have you heard anything like this? Inanimate objects?
I've heard it when people are making fun of identities.
Okay. So
I've heard it when people are
just
sort
listening, and I want to be able to have a conversation about it, but I'm not at that level to understand.
So we're in a small group and we're all friends here, and we've been together for a couple of sessions. So I'll say that I've heard people just be like, well, if I want to identify as a door, I'll just identify as a door. It's not kids, but I'm saying that may have been something that they heard, and it's coming from people who are not affirming and supportive of people identifying with the gender that they identify with.
Yeah, I'm
That's the
following that
only time
lead.
I've heard about that. And they would have heard it elsewhere. And it's
Okay.
just kind of like a new way of bullying is what I'm gonna say.
Okay.
I don't know
Okay.
that for sure, but that's the only way that I've ever heard
Yeah,
that.
I'm just pushed off guard. I just don't know how to follow it.
I would say ask the question. I
What do you
mean, engage in a conversation. Again, I know this is your friend and kids and all the things, so I don't know how appropriate.
Third graders saying this, so.
It sounds like bullying to me is what it sounds like, that
Okay.
they're like, well, if this person can identify as a boy when they're a girl, I can identify as a table. That's what it sounds like to me. But I'm open to maybe somebody else has heard something different. And
I
if
don't
that's
know.
the case, because I'm surely not the expert on this, but I'm just going off of what I think it probably is. That doesn't mean it is.
Unfortunately, yeah, I just don't feel like it's going in the right direction for understanding. And so I want to know how to handle it when in conversation in case it comes up. That's all.
Yeah. And so as I have young kids at my house. And I mean, just asking them, are you friends with the parents? So maybe even talking to the parents and be like, what do they mean? Like, what does that mean when
Well,
they
they don't.
identify
I've
as a,
already asked her. She's my best friend. She's like, this is what's going on.
and she hasn't asked her kid, like if my kid came home and said, I want to identify as a table, that would be a conversation we would be having. I would be like,
Yeah.
what do you mean by that? Like, say more about that. Like, because if you keep asking the questions, you're going to get to the root
Okay.
of whatever it is. And the answer needs to come from the kid, you know, I mean,
course.
because the kid's the one that's going to answer the question. But if it were me and my friends or my children, I would say, where did this come from? You know, this is new. What does this mean when you identify as a
Have
door?
you heard anything about identifying as a horse?
No. Now that's not to say that there's not, you know, there's definitely some kink and fetish type things,
Sure.
but for when you think about third graders, they probably don't know as much about kink and fetish stuff as I do,
I don't
to
know.
identify as a horse, and we can all use our imagination. And maybe they do. I mean, let's face it, the average age for a kid to see porn for the first time is 11. How old are third graders?
I think they're like 9.
Okay.
8 or
No.
9.
I don't
So
know.
I don't know. Anybody else want to unmute? Does anybody else have any thoughts
Someone
about
help
that?
me out here because I'm going to a whole 30.
I've heard people about the animals as well, but I've heard people say a cat, and then that they're using litter boxes as well.
Yeah. So I think there's the things that I've seen and the things that I've heard have been kind of what Leslie has shared. I've seen things, particularly in social media and particularly ways that folks are communicating, that seem to come from a place of having an agenda associated with how they're sharing that. And so I've heard a lot of different things kind of in the space. But I think what I hear here that's so very, very vital is part of that allows for us to begin to ask the questions for ourselves. What is the motive? What is the intent behind the things that we're trying to figure out and the things that we're trying to do? And to be as informed as possible so that we might be able to address those questions when they do come up. And so that's kind of what I've heard and how I've been able to address those questions when and as they come up. In the instances that I've been exposed to that, it's been around different motivations.
So Holly, since I'm already going to be reaching out to you via email to get your address so I can mail you a swag box, I will also be emailing you to follow up on the conversation that you have with the kids, and or that's, you know, a conversation that's facilitated by their parents, if that's more appropriate. I don't really know. But Holly, if you would drop your email address in the chat, and then I want to make sure that I get that so that I can follow up later. But thank you so much. Yeah, the pants just kind of helps me because a lot of times people throw sexual identity and sexual orientation in with gender, and they are two very different concepts. And it's important for us to separate those in order to be able to understand one or the other. Okay, so we're not going to talk a lot about expectations. This is typically where I would ask you, and I have something else to be interactive in 2 slides, but this is where I would ask you, like, what are your expectations for the day? So if there's anything that you're like, I definitely want to know this, don't let this session end without covering this. This has been on my mind. Let's talk about this. Drop that in the chat so that I'll see that and I'll know if we're coming up on the slide or if we're, you know, if that's something that I maybe need to dig a little deeper into and follow up later, which I am also very happy to do. But I have some really great data and stuff to share with y'all during this session. So I think you'll like it. Okay, so today our goals are to better understand why LGBTQ youth are disproportionately affected by substance use disorders, learn new ways that we are trying to reach LGBTQ youth to engage them in prevention, harm reduction, and all the things related to substance use disorder. And then I found, and some of you already may know about this, I found an absolutely what I would consider to be amazing resource for the state of Delaware. Pretty all-encompassing, but then also at the very end of this session, I have some other resources that I found for your state. Some of them are national, but I would also encourage you, and if you don't have already, I'm going to drop this here. I'm just going to go ahead right now while I think about it. But if anybody has any follow-up questions or, you know, something pops off and you're like, geez, I wish I could ask somebody about this. That's my email address at work. So you can shoot me an email. Anything to do with like conversations around queer identities, people living with HIV, let's just talk about it. Like we can schedule a 20-minute Zoom and just like bounce ideas. I'm happy to do that. So what I want to hear from y'all, why are LGBTQIA plus youth more likely to experience a substance use disorder than their cis het peers? So cis het, cisgender, heterosexual. So cis means same, so cisgender, so someone was born with a vagina, they identify as a girl, female, woman, that's cisgender, and then hetero is opposite gender relationship. So that cishet is, you'll hear that sometimes, and I actually left that in there as not an acronym but an abbreviation on purpose, so that when you hear cishet in the person in the future, and you will, that's what that means. So what are the reasons why LGBTQIA plus youth experience substance use disorders at a greater rate than their cishet peers? Tell me what your thoughts are.
You can raise your hand or you can put it in the chat. You can unmute yourself or you can put it in the chat.
Either.
I would say that it would be really, unless you have a support group, it'd be really hard to deal with it on your own. And so I think you would use any kind of coping strategy available.
Okay, so dealing with what? Your identity?
Acceptance.
Okay.
Not just yourself, but your environment.
Mm-hmm.
Lisa put feeling isolated. What other thoughts do you have, guys?
Well, how about this is actually an add-on question, but as I'm thinking about this, I just smiled a little bit because I'm like, oh, that's a good question. If I say to you, why are, you know, certain youth, or like if we took out that marginalized group with the LGBTQIA plus, what are some reasons why youth use substances? Just answer that question. What are some of the reasons why youth use substances? Looking for an escape. Thank you, Tom. And that could be true again for both.
I'd say I did all of them, and I was just bored and interested, excited about trying new things.
Yeah. Yeah. Like you're curious to know.
Really curious. Yeah.
Some of my friends who were in more rural areas said, because we didn't have nothing else to do. That's what we had. We had alcohol, we had substances, and to Lisa's point, to fit in, yes, right? And I would say that all of those things are still true for LGBTQIA plus students. Yes, the bullying part, and I will say this, and this is, it's always difficult to have conversations. Well, not always difficult to have conversations. I'm going to stop share for just a second so I can look at y'all's faces, but and we're going to talk about mental health also today, and the disproportionate effects of mental health on LGBTQIA plus youth and how that all exacerbates everything. But what we know is that trans people, trans youth, trans adults contemplate and complete suicide at a much greater rate than their cisgender counterparts, and also at much larger rates than even their LGBTQ peers. So there's something about this being trans. And as some of you may know, that for a very long time in the DSM, that being trans was considered a mental health issue, that these people had issues. That has since been removed. There are still some other gender-esque topics that may be found in there, but being trans is no longer a mental health diagnosis, if you will. So when I've talked about people being trans and the increased risk of suicide and substance use disorder and all of these things, I've heard people say in the past, like, well, they already have this mental health issue. Like, you know, the issue is not their identity. The issue is the way society treats them because of their identity. The way that society treats them because they dress in a way that society doesn't think that it's okay for them to dress. And we see this especially true with trans women. So when I say trans men or trans women, a trans man is a man who was born, sex assigned at birth was female, and then they transitioned to man. So trans man. Or trans woman, so someone who was born with a penis and now they are female, femme presenting. It's even more difficult for those people because when you think about trying to pass, it's not everyone's goal. Everyone's gender journey, if you will, is different. And so for some people, it's important that they walk down the street and people look at them and say, oh, that's just another cis woman walking down the street. For some people, they're okay to have a beard and lipstick and wear a skirt and a tie and, you know, all the things mixed together. And then our minds completely lose it because we're like, what is happening here? Like, you know, and the looks and the, so it's really not about their identity, but it's about their the way that society judges, bullies, views, you know, and then we constantly, if you'll remember the no homo that I shared with y'all last time, that link, if you go to nohomo.com and it comes up with all the derogatory words that people see on social media platforms, specifically Twitter, but every single day. It goes back to that. So it's not just what they see or hear walking down the street, it's what they hear on social media as well that impacts their mental health and then increases suicidal ideation. So a lot of this all comes down to trauma. And we're going to talk about very briefly, we're not going to go in depth because we don't have time, but adverse childhood experiences, which any of you who work with youth have probably heard of in the past. I heard something, and I can't remember if I shared it with this group, but it has really, really stuck with me and the way that I think about people who have substance use disorders and mental health issues and all of those things. Trauma is the gateway drug. Trauma is the gateway drug. if you think about people who are more likely to have substance use disorders, those are the people who most often started with a mental health issue. And a lot of times those things come from traumatic events. And so that's why we see the higher ACE score, the more likely someone is to experience substance use disorder, mental health issues, XYZ bad health outcome. It's trauma. So trauma is really the root of all of this. And between me, you, and the Zoom room today, actually, I'm being recorded. So these are Leslie's feelings. I think that the way to combat substance use disorder through prevention is to keep going upriver all the way back to how do we prevent ACEs in the next generation. Now, we're still going to generationally see these things that are happening because they're cellular. You know, we still see poor maternal health outcomes for Black women, and the research suggests that it's this generational thing from the trauma of racism and things that have happened in the past that still show up in our genetic material and make us more predisposed to poor health outcomes. And there's actual science to back that up. I remember the first time somebody told me that, like, you know, the reason why was because of generational trauma. And I was like, generational trauma. And then I started reading about it and I was like, okay, generational trauma. So it's not going to end just because we prevent ACEs in the next generation, but it's a start. The problem with that is that most often the funding that comes down for prevention is not as much as for treatment, which I'm sure y'all know. And you don't see change out of prevention dollars in a very fast way like you can in some other ways. It's harder to measure. It's harder to show people the work that you're doing with that money. And I think that's why, you know, that's why we don't get as much money for prevention, unfortunately. And I think I told you all, my master's is in education, but it's in public health. My specialty is in public health. And so I'm prevention and harm reduction to my core, but I also recognize that it's harder to show your success with prevention in a way that makes it seem like it's worth the money that's being put in, unless you look at it 30, 40, 50 years down the road. But that's the hard investment to make when you're talking about, you know, where to put the money, and everybody needs the money and everybody has great ideas, you know, for housing and for substance use disorder and all of those things. So like I mentioned, adverse childhood experiences leads to then branch out to disproportionate effects by all of these things. So if any of you have ever seen the adverse childhood experiences survey, there's a couple of different forms. The one that we were looking at using in Rowan County is 10 questions. And it basically says, you know, depending on the score, you would be this much more disproportionately likely to experience these things. So, and you can see, I don't need to read all of these things to you, but we've got mental health included in there, issues with maternal health that then trickle down to the child, chronic diseases, risky behaviors, and that's not just substance use disorder, that can also be risky sexual behaviors, and risky sexual behaviors are exacerbated by substance use disorder. So it's like this symbiotic relationship that sort of builds on one another, you know, and I can't speak for Delaware. In North Carolina, you cannot legally consent to sexual activity when you're under the influence of a substance. And so then you add in all these other consequences that come about from, you know, sexual assault and things like that that happen as a result. And so it's just kind of this tumbleweed that happens. Ooh, so excited. Okay, so y'all check this out. This is really great. So this poster, it was created. It was based on over 340,000 interviews conducted by Gallup in 2017. And so I know it's 2017. The way that everyone needs to look at that is that this kind of research has really not even been happening since COVID has started, or since COVID back in 2020. And so a lot of the most current data that you'll see is pre-COVID, especially when it's these large type studies. So my guess for all of these is that that some of these would be exacerbated. However, I've seen data that actually states the opposite. I've seen data saying that youth substance use went down over the pandemic, and then I've seen data that said, so I think it just depends on, who you're surveying. But so this does say that 4.5% of the population identifies as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender. That number is low. And I think that we're going to continue to see that number rise as people become more and more comfortable with identifying in that way. There are state, for instance, and I'll just call out North Carolina because we definitely do not get a medium on the friendly state. Let me just tell you that. So good job, Delaware. But in North Carolina, you can still be terminated from your job because you identify as queer. So if we wonder why kids are not seeing representation through their teachers in the schools, for forever, it's so important to have representation in all the things, so it's important for Black youth to see Black educators leading classes in their schools, so they see people look like them doing the work. It's also true for queer kids. Queer kids need to see queer adults that are thriving and succeeding and doing the things, and it's difficult if they're not supported in society, especially in the workplace. So the percentage, this is interesting, and this leads to my hypothesis that this is going to continue to grow. The number is going to continue to grow. The percentage of those who identify as LGBT decreases as the age increases. So the older folks are less likely to identify as LGBTQ. And if you think about society and how far we've come in being able to talk about these things, even though we're still not all the way able to, but they grew up in that era of like, you don't talk about it, you don't recognize it, you just marry a person of an opposite sex and keep it moving, and if you're miserable, you just are. So just hush, So what I think is that as we see these older generations die off, the youth are going to come in and that number is going to keep rising. So again, it's not an issue of, somebody asked me the other day, why are we seeing increased numbers of HIV diagnosis? The HIV has been there. We're doing a better job of normalizing testing and treatment and access. We're doing a better job. And so we're getting higher numbers, but that's great. We're getting more people into care. That doesn't mean that it hasn't been there. And it's the same with these queer identities. They've always been there, but now we're making it safe for people to say, hey, count me in, I'm queer, like count me in that number. So I thought that was when I was doing the research, that was one of the most interesting things that I saw, because sometimes you have these thoughts like a hypothesis, but then you don't have any data to back it up, but we have data to back it up. So the older you are, the less likely you are to identify. The jump was particularly high between millennials. And so millennials were those born between 80 and 99. And then Gen X, which was 1965 and 79. 8.2% of millennials identify as LGBT. So there we see 8.2% of millennials. And then only 3.5% of Gen X. That doesn't mean they're not there. That means that they didn't feel comfortable identifying. Let's see, in 2017, more women identified as LGBT than men. Again, I think that's about having a safe space. I think it's safer for women to say that they're lesbian than for men to say that they're gay. I mean, it just is what it is. And for people who do the sexual health work, and I know there's a couple of people on here who have sexual health conversations. If I say, hey, my name's Leslie, I've had sex with women before, but I really prefer to be with men and I'm just going to be with men now. Society's like, okay, word, that sounds good. If I'm a man and I say I've had sex with men, but now I only want to be with women and I'm just going to be with women and I'm straight now, it's like, it's not as accepted. So that's just kind of the, and we are society, so we have the capacity to change that, but we can't change it if we're not having these conversations. So again, kudos to all of y'all for being in the room today to listen to all of this. So The adverse and sometimes traumatic events that LGBTQ plus individuals experience throughout their lifetime can create these lifelong effects in much of a way that we see with adverse childhood experiences. Many times these individuals will develop mental health issues as a result of painful experiences that they experienced as youth. So 57% of those who identified as LGBTQ plus have experienced slurs relating to their sexual orientation or gender identity. So 57%. 53% of LGBTQ plus have experienced similar insensitive or offensive comments, and 57% have reported that they or their LGBTQ plus friends or family members have been threatened or non-sexually harassed. So when you think about that disproportionate effect of bullying, negative words, slurs, all of those things have an effect on our mental health, which then have an impact on substance use disorder. Oh, this is a big one too. 51% of people surveyed. So, I mean, this is out of over 340,000 interviews. 51% said that they or their LGBTQ plus friends or family members have been sexually harassed or experienced violence. And although I don't have the hetero data, I can tell you that it's lower than that. No, you know, a lot of times people are bullied or harassed because of the way that they look when they walk down the street. I mean, we didn't all. I went to a public school. Let Leslie talk about Leslie. And I remember people being bullied for the clothes that they wore, even when they weren't queer. The way that they smelled, the ratty kids, you know, they came in like smelling. At the time, you don't know that it's because mom and dad aren't present. They don't have money. They might be homeless. You know, they're food insecure. The only food they eat is when they're at school during the day. I make it a point now, knowing what I know now. My parents never even said that to me. Like, if I came home and talked about, like, my parents were never not like, Leslie, that kid could be poor or might not have what you have or might have XYZ thing. And now when my kids come home and say that, I'm like, well, isn't that privileged of you? Did you have to worry about where you're eating dinner tonight? Because maybe they did. Why not, instead of coming home and telling me about this kid, why not making sure that the teachers are aware and that there's some supports in place? Because it has to change with these kids, because these kids are the ones that are bullying the other kids. You know, it's not the parents in there saying the things. So, okay, I'm going to get off my soapbox. So the mental health issues that we see are just exacerbated by all of the things that I just mentioned. People who identify as gay, lesbian, or bisexual are 2 to 3 times more likely to have long-term psychological or emotional issues than heterosexual people. That's a fact, 2 to 3 times more likely. And what we now know is that with the psychological or emotional issues, then comes substance use disorder. So that's where a lot of that comes from. Another study that was conducted in 2015 identified that 1.9 million LGBTQ plus adults experienced a major depressive episode in that past year, including 1.4 million who had a major depressive episode with severe impairment. I do not know what they are referencing as severe impairment, but I'm assuming the inability to work and things like that. So 15.1% of LGBTQ plus adults had an alcohol or drug use disorder in the past year, 15.1%, whereas only 7.8% of heterosexual adults experience the same. So you're 2 times per this study, 2 times more likely to experience an alcohol or drug use disorder if you are queer versus straight. And then 20 to 30% of LGBTQ individuals have abused substances throughout their lifetime, whereas only 9% of the general population admit to that. And right down here in the bottom left, transgender people attempt suicide 9 times more than the entire US population. That's what I was talking about earlier. And I didn't realize that that stat was on this poster when I cited that, but that is absolutely accurate. And homelessness also, queer youth, and especially trans youth experience homelessness at a much larger rate, which also leads into substance use disorder, riskier behaviors, engaging in sex work to find housing, to get food, to do all the things. So when you think about risky behavior and risky sexual behavior, sometimes it's for them to live. They're engaging in these activities just to make it to the next day in hopes that it's going to be better. So, okay, we're going to go to the next slide now. Does anybody have any questions or comments or thoughts about this slide before we keep it moving?
I think this is an extraordinary slide. This
Right?
This has some powerful information on it.
Right. And I actually linked this in, I'm not sure, it was in the list of the links that I sent you that were in the body of the email where I had sent you the PDF. This is there. And so you can actually go and actually get all the data from all the things that I was just telling you off to the side. You can actually go and look deeper into the data than just this slide. But I think, you know, if you're trying to make a case for doing more work with queer youth, this is a great slide to do that, especially if you're going to talk to people who have the capacity to fund.
Absolutely. And Thomas, I'll be providing that information to you all for dissemination.
Yay. Okay, good. So this slide is from the Trevor Project. And actually, I'm going to share this slide for a moment. And then I realized as I was digging in deeper that there were two other slides that I wanted to share also, which are very important slides. And I think y'all are going to be as like, well, as I was. So this is substance use in the last year among LGBTQ youth. So 47% of LGBTQ youth under the age of 21 had used alcohol. And then 29% of the youth had used marijuana in the past year, and 11% for prescription drug misuse. And over half of LGBTQ youth used alcohol in the last year, including the 47% of LGBTQ youth under the age of 21. I'm going to stop share real quick because I want to share something different. If you'll just bear with me for a moment while I pull up there it is. Okay, so this is kind of a smaller, but I wanted to show you this. Is everyone familiar with conversion therapy? So conversion therapy, which unfortunately is still legal in some states, is the idea of you can change a person's sexual orientation, gender identity, those things through conversion therapy. There's different types of conversion therapy. Some of them are through the church, some of them are community, but all of them have been deemed to be harmful, and they are not a best practice in any way, shape, or form. And so as I was continuing to look, I also found this. So rates of substance use by experiences of conversion therapy. And what we see is that the use rates go up because conversion therapy is additional trauma. So that was one thing that I thought was interesting. And then also rates of suicide attempts in the last year among LGBTQ youth under 21 by substance use. So the youth, so the people who, this is all youth under 21. So youth under 21 who were regularly using alcohol, 24% attempted suicide. So 1/4 of LGBTQ youth under 21 who were regularly using alcohol attempted suicide, 1 in 4. That's insane. Like, that is an insane number. And then almost 1/3 who regularly used marijuana attempted suicide. And then, wow, 40% of youth, LGBTQ youth under the age of 21 who regularly misused prescription drugs had attempted suicide in the past year. That's almost 1 in 2. I mean, it's just insane. How much these things, you know, as I had already, so, and I've got those slides in a PDF, Carlton, I'll send you after this. And there's also that link. But as I continued to do the research for this particular presentation, and I stopped on that one slide because we were talking about substance use. And then as I kept reading, I was like, holy moly, like, are you kidding me right now? So yeah, so that's that part. Okay, we're going to continue on.
Part of what it is that I love about what you're sharing is the fact that you're helping us to pull the layers of the onion back, right? We tend to have these conversations, but we tend to have these conversations in a very superficial manner. And so, you know, when you pull back the layer, it's more than being bullied. It's more than just the fact that, you know, they feel isolated. It's more than those things. What you're getting to is kind of what's at the real, what's at the heart of a lot of it, and the issues and the challenges are shocking because they aren't spoken about. We don't talk about these things, and so that's what I really love about what it is that you're presenting.
Well, and like I said, if any of you are interested in the full research around both of these slides, the link will be shared with you. It's part of the links that I had shared with Carlton, but it goes into the background of the research, the abstract, the methods, the summary. So for any of you data research geeks out there, that'll be coming your way, so you can actually delve into that and see like what the process looked like. But I get chills when I think about some of these disproportionate effects. It's just, the numbers are just amazing, and not in a good way. So we are going to do a shift into talking about some ideas for things that can be done to help LGBTQ youth access affirming services. And one of the things that we had talked about previously, and I'm not sure if I actually shared this with Carlton, but I will so that it can go out to y'all, is the language policy that I created. So again, when we're talking about increasing access, we can't just talk about increasing access for the clients that we serve, because if we are not increasing access for ourselves to get the information, to make the policy changes, to be supported and have the support that we need to then support these marginalized groups, then it's not going to happen. And so one of the so the task force that I chair, we did a community needs assessment, and then we formed work groups based on our community needs assessment data. One of those things that we need to increase is the education around being person-centered and trauma-informed. I know those are very much some buzzwords. Person-centered is kind of taking over for the word trauma-informed, and I still use them both because it's kind of like cultural competence versus cultural humility, if you will. Person-centered is kind of the preferred term, but we want to make sure that within our organization, in our organization as a whole, that we are using language that is affirming to all identities. I think I've said this before, but when I walk into a classroom, and I would suggest that you do the same and actually share this with other people, especially if they're not as much on the LGBTQ information and topics. Anytime I walk into a room, a space, I'm going to teach, everybody in that room for me is queer. If I go in and think to myself, everyone in here is queer, I will never misgender. I will never make assumptions about them. You know, we're raised just like we're raised in a very binary society. We are raised in a very cisgender, heterocentric society where it's kind of, the assumption is that you are straight until you state otherwise. And that puts people who are LGBTQ in a place where they have to constantly identify themselves, constantly introduce themselves so that people understand that, like, they're not heterosexual, which is so like silly that they have to do that. But so go in thinking that, and that will help you out a lot. So we're doing this Show Us Your Intake campaign, and it's based on an idea that every single, and I can't speak for all of your organizations, but the vast majority of time when somebody comes in for a service, they get an intake form. The intake form asks them questions. A lot of times they're very personal questions. So when you think about being person-centered, I would also recognize or recommend rather a trigger warning or a trauma warning before you go into asking these questions. There's a really awesome activity. It's called privacy circles. I'll share that with y'all also. But basically the way privacy circles works is and this is a really good activity to do with people who have a lot of privilege that don't really understand like the importance of these things. But the privacy circles, it starts out on the very outside with like, basically, I would share this information with anyone. And then it goes to like social media, casual friend, partner. And then the very center one is like, only me and my higher power can know this thing. And there's like this list of like 20 questions. And before we even get into that, we say, how do you like, are you an open book, or do you feel like you hold your personal information kind of close to the chest, you know, and just kind of sign your name in the circle where you think you would be most comfortable sharing most of this information. And then as we go through, put an X in the mark in the box of like where you would be comfortable sharing the answer to this question. We don't actually make them answer the question. The questions are a lot. Have you ever been paid for sex? How old were you when you lost your virginity? What's your social security number? You know, and so you have these people who have already faced these traumas, and then you're bringing them into your space. And in order for them to get these services, they have to fill out the intake form. We do it here because we provide HIV testing. And some of those questions, not their social security number, but we ask them how many sex partners they've had in the past 3 months. Have they been using intravenous drugs? Have you been paid for sex in the past however long? How many sex partners have you had? And I wouldn't say that everybody starts that out with like, hey, check it out. I know you're already stressed because you're in here to get tested for HIV, but we need to ask these questions so we know how to best serve you. And just taking that moment to say that could make a big difference. So when we're talking about policy change, although I already mentioned the language policy, which I'm happy to share with you all openly in a Word doc that you can make it your own at your own institution if you want to, or organization. But having policies around how we facilitate these forms, having policies about how we ask the questions, because how we treat that person in that moment is very indicative of if they're going to come back for services later, how they're going to talk about us in the community. What are they going to say about you behind your back after you come and have a conversation with them? And I know some of you directly serve youth. You know, what would the youth say about you? What would they say if they went home and told their parents about this information that they heard today? What would they say about you? Are there any areas that you think you could improve? Like as we're sitting here having, well, it's not really a conversation, I'm talking, so I'm going to shut up and let y'all tell me. But are there areas based on what we've talked about that you're like, that's something that I could do to improve the way I'm currently engaging with my demographic?
There are a number of things that you said today that really struck me in that way. I think even starting with what you have on the screen right now in terms of having a sense of a person-centered kind of attitude or approach as I'm engaging, what I'm getting is that there's a reason why this is a stretch for many of us, and the more we recognize that, the more we have to be willing to go through that stretch in order to serve our young people better. So that's one of the things that I've gotten from what you shared. How about you all?
So I'd like to say that I'm going into Epworth Methodist Church for after school program, Boys and Girls Club, and I'm not allowed really to go in that kind of conversation mode without permission from parents. But after being a teacher for 10 years in a middle school, and it was in an ILC, so it was of those that have special needs. I don't know how many conversations are really allowed. We definitely had, worked towards identifying some students as having needed like certain bathrooms, and it was acceptable. Like the kids were like open to it. But I just don't know that we have a lot of time as a teacher or in an after school program or even allowed to have these conversations at all. Do you know what are you following me?
I come from a very conservative, well, I'm not conservative, but I grew up in Gastonia, North Carolina. And when I say that I'm very different from 99.9% of the people that come out of Gastonia, it's not a stretch. Still having any kind of conversations in the schools, it sounds very similar. And it's hard. It's hard because for me, so like I taught for 1 year in that school system and left after 1 year. I resigned after 1 year because in my mind it was a dilemma, because it was a disservice to these students to have them ask me questions that I was literally prevented
Yeah.
at risk of being terminated from answering. And I had.
It's not until after they get into an altercation of some sort or someone identifies as being bullied that then we can talk about it. So I'm really not sure how the prevention mode is allowed to take place at such a younger age.
That's a very good point.
A lot of times it's programs that are available outside of the school time. Is that, so you're talking about going into a church, so that's not a school, or is it a school?
I think they have an early like a daycare thing in the I don't know what it's called. I don't have kids, so I don't know all the terms, but I think that there's a preschool thing maybe. But what I'm going to is into an after school, and I have to even get permission to do anything for that matter. It's obviously evidence-based. We're doing a learning to breathe curriculum, but these conversations I'm not going to be bringing up. I'm just saying if they were to be brought up, I want to be prepared,
Yeah, and it's hard is what I would say. A lot of the success that's been had over these more diverse conversations, they are conversations that sometimes have to happen. Like, for instance, there is a particular curriculum that's evidence-based, data-driven, all the things, but it's around sexual health and communication and things like that, and it's nothing outlandish. It's very, I think it's, anyways, but students have to have signed permission and participate after school. It's not even, they won't even let them facilitate this curriculum during school hours. So I get it. I'm familiar with working with these more conservative areas. I think that what we can do is, like you're doing, like, make yourself as prepared as you can be if this comes up, because that's, when it's about politics and, different levels of organizations that make decisions, and then you have parents, and sometimes the positions that the people hold who make the decisions are elected positions. And so it's all about, like, there's all these things that play into why are we not allowed to talk about these things. The data tells us, and I can share the data with people until I'm purple. It's not that. It's not about being data driven at all. In my experience, it's really about, like, who's got the money, who makes the decisions about who's in office, and things like that. And that's really, unfortunately, what drives a lot of this, and not the health and well-being of our students, which is what it should be about. So I don't know the answer for how to get around that, except to suggest that, there are certain curriculums that can be facilitated like we'll do programs at community centers and things like that. And a lot of times, you know, the places that need it the most, that have the least resources, are the places that are most open to the content. You know, so I don't know this, but when I think about who would be in like a Methodist pre-K or after school program, I see privileged kids. I don't see the kids that are with all the other asterisks. I don't see them being there. And that's just me guessing. I don't know that for a fact, but.
Leslie, could you do me a favor? Could we stop sharing for a moment?
Oh gosh, yes. I love to stop share.
Terrific, terrific. So, and thank you for that, Holly. I'm very, very much interested in the piece of information that you might have gotten from this conversation so far that you think you might be able to apply in one way or another, or something that just stood out from the conversation that Leslie's had. She's provided a good bit of information all, during this time. And so I'm curious with each and every one of you, what one thing have you heard today that you think you'll hold on to and be able to take into the work that you're doing? And if you don't mind, I'm going to go the name by name, and you all are situated like the Brady Bunch here. And so I'm going to go. I'm sorry, Lindsay, you're in the Cindy Brady position. You're in the Cindy Brady position. So I'm going to start with you.
Okay, so you want something that you feel like we've really sticks with you. So I would say it really stuck with me the first time, but then again, with us recapturing it again, I would say the pants thing. I think that really sticks with me.
Got it.
Good. I'm glad.
Got it. Dr. Hackett, you're actually in Alice's position, so I have to go to you next. I'm sorry.
To be very honest with you, while she was very articulate in what she was saying, I didn't find anything today that I would care to say to any of the people that I work with in the manner that it was presented to me. Because I think some of these things are for families, and I don't want to say anything to divide the family, because I am an educator for over 40 years, and I may be in that category, but that's where I've seen suicide situations happen. So it's not something that you talk about even cavalier, or this is what happens, because a lot of time it is an individual pursuit with the entire family. And that's what happens with a lot of suicide situations. And as far as talking to children that are in the very young grades, who may be a tomboy, so forth and so on, you yourself need to really be an authority on things in order to start calling a situation, which you may think it is, because you could do more harm than good, and drive a child to get bullied more than it has to be. So I wouldn't see myself as someone who could use this as an authority to talk to someone else about it from this this setting.
No, that's very valuable. Thank you for that. And it's
You're welcome.
extraordinary, honest conversation. And what we're having are honest conversations. These things are difficult regardless of where and how we speak to it. And so it's kind of like stretching a muscle that hasn't been stretched and it's not used to being stretched. And so we're going to feel how are we able to do this, and how are we able to do this well. And I understand that completely. And I understand that everybody on this screen may not experience the conversation in the exact same way as everybody else. That is perfectly fine, because that's where we are as a society. Part of what it is that I like to bring up and provoke, and hopefully this will provide some value to the conversations that we're having, and why it was important for us to bring this conversation today, is that as we're thinking about equity, and as we're thinking about conversations of inclusion, which include the conversations that are relevant to the LGBTQ youth. Part of what it is that I understand is that it is not merely about redressing harms or redressing issues of justice. Those are vitally important. Those are core to the aspect of what it is that we're doing. But it's also very, very much about engagement, and how are we able to engage those voices and engage those who have different sets of experiences, whose voices and experiences are very often not a part of what it is that they have an opportunity to contribute to. And we have to become the vehicle by which that engagement is normalized. And so it requires us to have these conversations. And so I thank you for that. I thank you
You're
for
welcome.
your contribution. And I'd ask the same of Thomas. Tom, you indicated that how substance misuse compounded in the LGBT community increases suicide. Lugoso Gaif, do you want to expand on that? You got to unmute yourself, sir. Oh, okay.
All right, there we go.
There you
Can you hear me now?
hear you.
Yes.
Okay. Just based on the slides that she identified, the marijuana, the alcohol, and the pills, especially with the pills where there was like 1 and 2, or I think it was like 40% of individuals who engage in those types of behaviors are at high risk of suicide or actually follow through with suicide. And I mean, the main purpose of prevention is to save lives. And if that's our focus, and this is an area that creates such a high number, it just put a radar up for me to really focus in on this population, that, you know, as soon as you hear certain keywords, that's to heighten your arousal, to be really focused, and your awareness to be focused on those individuals, to let them know, hey, that person needs help. It's a cry for help. And I should definitely take them very seriously, because their life is at stake based on these numbers.
Excellent, excellent. The numbers were a bit shocking and surprising to me, and I've been in this business for a long time. Those numbers that were shown were a bit shocking to me. Holly, how about yourself, please?
So I will piggyback off of you, Thomas, in that the numbers were surprising, but I don't think they're even the right numbers. They're probably much higher. And so, and having said that, I'm just a little concerned about these generations. I'm 47. I'm like, they're talking about things that, whether it's being bullying because they're identifying as a horse or a window, the point is that there's not clarification as to really what the need is. And so I got to be able to relate. And I'm older. I'm not like old, but it's really I'm having a tough time understanding how to communicate.
Yeah.
I don't know how to go about it. Like, I don't have the language. I don't, I'm here to help, but at the same time, I'm a pretty laid back girl. And yet I still have this, I hate to call it cliche generational gap, but I am struggling here. So
No,
that's what I just take away from the whole thing. I'm just not where I need to be. I need more. I need more. I don't know how to do it. I need more.
Understood. Thank you so very, very much for that. I feel very similar, very, very similar, in that I am learning and stretching and attempting to know. And what I find is that I'm learning more about myself as we have many more of these kind of conversations, and it opens me up to different things. So thank you very much for that. I think Lisa indicated that the concepts of going upriver to prevent ACEs is one of the things that you identified. Lisa, do you want to expand on that at all?
I think Lisa's actually in a place where,
She can.
yeah, I think she said that she has a loud office setting, so that was why she had dropped some stuff in the chat.
Got it. Lauren, do you have something to add to the conversation, please? And if not, I'm going to go to Amy. Amy, do you have something that you've gotten from the conversation today that you think will be of some use?
Well, yeah, I very much enjoyed it again. Thank you for the presentation. What I took away from this, I am piggybacking off of Lisa, which was the ACEs being that root cause of substance use. I actually think that as well, or have explored that topic as the trauma is what is triggering the boredom, what is triggering looking for other things to do, or the escape or the attention or the negative or whatever that might be. So I appreciated that as well.
Really quickly before we jump off, because I didn't share this, but if you all are not familiar with this website, this helpisherede.com, check it out. I don't know if North Carolina has a site like this. This is an awesome, awesome resource for the state of Delaware. It keeps an active count here. The current Delaware suspected overdoses for 2023 is 56. Yesterday or day before when I was on doing some research, it was 53. So it's an active count. It's got information about fentanyl, teen drug use prevention toolkits, Narcan, all of these local Delaware hotlines around coaching, support, mental health, addiction, crisis, what have you. Online treatment connections, including Atlas. If you've ever heard of Shatterproof, that was another one that I shared, but you can go on there, type in your zip code, and it brings up substance use disorder places, different clinics. I mean, this website is, every state should have one just like it. So it's Help Is Here, DE for Delaware, helpisherede.com. So check that out if you haven't already. And I greatly appreciated everyone's feedback. Linda, if you ever have 30 minutes to chat with me in a Zoom, I'd love to chat with you, because I don't think I fully understood on a very small level what you were saying, but being that you've been in education for as long as you have, and you have a different lens and perspective, it would do me a world of good to hear you elaborate, and we just don't have the time for that now, but I would love to, if you're open to it. Yeah. I can't hear you, Carlton.
I said, thank you very, very much, everyone. Lisa, thank you very, very much for the information and for the presentation today. Again, great, great job. Everybody, thank you so much for being willing to be a part of this conversation and being willing to bring your authentic selves to this conversation. That's how we move forward. That's how we move forward as a society. I heard this definition the other day of what it is that we're about. And it stuck with me. It tells us that public health is about the collective will of a society to ensure that they are making the choices to help everyone be healthy. And so part of what this is all about is that we are working together collectively as a society in order to figure out how we might be able to ensure that everyone is able to obtain and access real health. So thank you so much for the conversation, being willing to be a part of that conversation. We're looking forward to everything. Thomas, I'll be sending you the information so that you'll have it. And we look forward to all of you all the next time. Thank you so very, very much. Take care.
Thank you all.